Welcome to this third dialogue on the future of regions that will focus today on what factors influence the attractiveness of non-metropolitan territories to nomad workers and visitors. As people are slowly joining us, I'll just outline three important logistical points. So first, the meeting will be held in English and no interpretation is available today. You can use the Q&A function throughout the event to ask your questions to Juliette Langlais and to Dr. Rodriguez-Posse, and also to share references or web links you want us to share. And finally, the event is recorded and the video will be posted on our website along with a synthesis of the discussion's main outcomes and the presentation used by Juliette. So thanks everyone for joining. I wish you all a great event, and I'll give the floor to Dorothée Allen-Dupré, who is the head of the OECD Regional Development and Multi-Level Governance Division. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Margot. Dear all, it's my pleasure to welcome you all in this third dialogue on the future of regions and how areas outside of large urban agglomerations can become more attractive. First, let me say a few words about our work at the OECD on rethinking regional attractiveness in the new global environment. I will then introduce our two guests, Andrés Rodriguez-Posse and Juliette Langlais. So the topic of regional attractiveness is very high on the policy agenda of many countries and regions as they seek to navigate an evolving global environment. Regions and cities find themselves at a critical juncture. They strive for attractiveness at a time of trade and FDI disruption following several shocks from COVID-19 to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And they strive against the backdrop of challenges raised by climate, technological, and demographic change, which are not at all impacting regions in the same way. So to support policymakers in navigating this changing environment, we launched a large-scale project with the support of the European Commission DG Regio. The project includes 15 regional case studies and helps assess how regions fare in globalization and how they can enhance regional attractiveness of investors, talent, and visitors. We know regions face significant challenges across all these dimensions. Many regions still struggle, for example, to bring back international visitors after the pandemic, and global tourism flows are expected to fully recover only in 2025 at the earliest. COVID-19 also exacerbated within country FDI disparities. Between 2003 and 2021, the top 10% of regions in OECD countries with the highest greenfield FDI attracted on average 700 times more than the bottom 10% of regions. Our work on regional attractiveness is not only about helping regions address these challenges, but it is also about better positioning regions globally so that they can leverage on the opportunities of megatrends, and notably the green and digital transition. It includes, for instance, helping regions make the most of the massive uptake of remote working in these past few years, notably in more rural areas that are still lagging behind for remote working, as the OECD report, Regions and City at a Glance 2022 evidence. This is partly explained by the fact that the digital divide between urban and rural areas, although it has declined in recent years, remains very high, with internet more than 50% faster in cities than in rural areas in G20 countries. So to inform our work, we have launched this series of dialogues on the future of regions to hear from experts, academics, private sector representatives, and practitioners about how major transformations can impact regional attractiveness. For the first two dialogues, we welcome two internationally renowned academics, Parag Khanna, who spoke about the forces behind people mobility and the policies and investment required for regions to attract talent, and Richard Florida, who discussed the role of creativity and innovation in attracting talent and investment to non-metropolitan regions for lasting sustainable development. For this third dialogue, we put the theory of attractiveness assets into practice in a way as we welcome Airbnb, and we get insights on how people's travel, telework, and habits are changing, and the benefits and challenges that attracting new people, even temporarily, can bring to local communities. So I'm now turning to our guest today. So we are lucky to welcome back our esteemed moderator, Dr. Andrés Rodríguez-Pose, who is the Princesa de Asturias Chair and Professor of Economic Geography at the London School of Economics. Andrés is a regular advisor to government and international organizations, leveraging his expertise in regional dynamics for development. His research is very frequently used by policy and decision makers and by experts around the world, including many of us at the OECD, notably to support the work of the Regional Development Policy Committee. It is also my great pleasure to welcome Juliette Langlais, Public Policy and Campaign Director for Europe, the Middle East and Africa at Airbnb. Established in 2007, when two hosts famously welcomes 3 guests to their San Francisco home, Airbnb now operates in every country in the world and has become, in just 15 years, a key player in the vacation rental industry with a market share of over 20%. Juliette Langlais is here with us today to paint a picture of evolving travel and teleworking tastes and how Airbnb works with local authorities in rural and less populated urban areas to leverage these trends to support their own sustainable development. So we very much look forward to hearing this private sector perspective today, as businesses are, of course, essential to any effective attractiveness and development strategy. Juliette will start with a 25 minutes presentation, followed by a 30 minutes of discussion moderated by Andrés, and we will then open the floor for questions from the audience before my colleague Peter concludes the events. So without further ado, Juliette, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dorothy, and thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to be there with you today. So my name is Juliette. I'm the Director for Public Policy at Airbnb for EMEA, and I will try to, as you said, Dorothy, to paint a picture of the trends we observe today on the platform, the way people are changing how they travel, how they live in Airbnb throughout the world. So the idea for me today is really to have an open conversation with you, and I will be happy to take the question from the floor at the end of this presentation. As you said, Dorothy, I'm very honored because I'm the first representative of the private sector, and I think it's a very good approach from the OECD and this specific working group to include more representative of the private sector to give their thoughts and give their views. So again, very happy to be there with you today. I will start with a few slides that I wanted to share with you. It's really to give you the big picture, and then we can go more into details. And from time to time, I will also share my screen to show you how this translates into the Airbnb website, because I'm sure that most of you are users of Airbnb, maybe some of you are not, but you will have a clear idea of what I'm talking about. So let's go. I will share my screen. So we'll start with first an introduction, then I will focus on what we call at Airbnb the live and work anywhere. That's the name we have given to this trend we observed across the world with people staying longer, traveling for a longer time and mixing work and life. And then we'll have the Q&A. So to start, wanted to share with you this picture. So the first question I will have for you is, do you know where it is? So it's in the very, very rural part of Netherlands, a village called Meer. it's close to the border with Belgium, close to the border with Germany. It's very close to Maastricht. And it's only 964 inhabitants. The reason why I want to share this picture with you is that it's where I was last week working during 1 week as my family was having holidays there, right? And it is something that I would not have done before, right? I live in Paris, I'm based in Paris, and previously I didn't have the opportunity to be working from anywhere. But last week, I worked for 1 week in this very rural part of Netherlands. And the question for you is how and why I did end up there in rural part of Netherlands. So first is because Airbnb very early after COVID has given the opportunity to its employees to choose to work and live from anywhere in the world. It's not only true for us in policy, it's true for everybody across the company. And Brian Chesky, who is the CEO of Airbnb, took this decision because he had anticipated that after COVID, people will not experience travel and life as they used to, right? They want to have freedom, they want to be to own their time and to also decide on the place they live and work. And maybe it doesn't mean that the time of the office is over, but at least people are free to choose where they want to live and to work. And so having this opportunity in my hand, I choose the Netherlands. Why? Because why not, right? Sometimes you are very, in February, you are most likely to go skiing or most likely to experience a destination with sun. I wanted to discover more the rural parts of Netherlands and also to have the opportunity to discover several countries at once. So go to Haren, for instance, in Germany, but also go to Liège in Belgium and have the opportunity to revisit Maastricht, which it's a city which I like very much. And so what I did on the Airbnb website is I looked for Maastricht, right? And that's what the website offered me. This map shows you how dispersed the accommodation available on Airbnb are. And so when even if you look for a specific cities, which is Maastricht, you are being offered a large variety of accommodation which fits your needs. So here I was traveling with my family with small kids. So I was looking for a house with some, equipment for babies, ideally in the middle of the countryside so that the kids could play outside, etc., etc. And this was the map which appeared on the website. And then I choose a destination. Initially, I looked for Maastricht, so an urban city, right? But then I ended up in Meer, this small village of 900 inhabitants. And so that's the way I experience. I mean, the reason why I want to share this personal experience is to tell you how people are, how the way traveling is evolving. What we observe on the platform is that people are looking for more flexibility. It's not only flexibility about the time of the year they travel. They do not travel anymore again only during season holiday. They pick up long weekend. They stay, from the Wednesday to Saturday. I mean, the old calendar aspect is overlooked, right? People are much more flexible to live and to travel whenever they want because they are not linked anymore to a specific place to work with. So doing that, there is a better dispersion of tourism and travel outside of the peak season. So for instance, it's not anymore July and August, but it's more May, June, or even September and October. And the reason why they are doing it is first because they are, of course, they are more flexible, but also because they are able to look for more affordable accommodation because the prices out of the peak season are lower, and also because they are able to have a broader choice of supply and accommodation. So that's the first key trend we observe, that people travel off the peak season. The second trend we observed is that they spend longer time, right? It's not anymore about a weekend or one night stay, it's about longer stays. And it's a phenomenon that we've observed on the platform since COVID, right? People are looking for long-term accommodation, and the number of stays on the platform above 28th night, about 1 month, has increased a lot. It represents today one fifth of the night booked. So these two phenomena are really transforming the way tourism is being shaped, of the peak season and longer stays. Longer stays also because obviously people not only go to a place to discover it or to see touristic sites, but also because they want to take the time to work or to just enjoy their free time. This is true for remote worker, obviously, but this is also true for a specific population we observe on the platform, which are the seniors, right, or retiree. When you're a retiree, you are not tied to a specific schedule. You can travel whenever you want. And this is also a trend we observe, which is important in EMEA. And the fact that these people are traveling, off the peak season and for longer stay has benefited a specific geography. And this is really the key topic of our talk today, that we observe that people are looking for countryside. They are looking for stays outside of the large cities. They want quiet, they want some calm, they want to be in the middle of the countryside, as I did in the rural part of Netherlands. And this is a key trend that we started to observe a little bit before COVID. Was already some sign that guests were looking for something else, right? For more space, more quiet, more nature connection. And we observe that in the EU, for instance, when we've seen the increase of rural stays by 55%. This is a key figure that I want to share with you because it reflects a strong dynamism since the end of the COVID and tourism recovery. We could say that after COVID, tourism recovery has been driven by this look for more authentic, for more rural stays. And of course, as you may understand, this is crucial for the region, right? And for these rural areas, which have sometimes been deprived, out of the beaten tracks, out of the economic growth. And this is for them a real opportunities. And when we talk about guests looking for a place, we need to have places, right? And so it's very important for the hosts who are welcoming guests in this area, because they also benefit from this trend and benefit from economic opportunities. If we look at the EU only, there are more than 1.3 million hosts today who are welcoming guests in their homes from time to time on an occasional basis. And this is bringing benefits not only to them, the host, because when you book on Airbnb, when you receive a guest on Airbnb, you keep 97% of the money paid. So it's an important additional income, and even more important in the current situation of inflation, right? You need to afford the cost of living, you need to pay your bills, you need to afford the increased cost of energy. This is true across the board, and especially in the EU. And here we have an example of a host in Greece, but I could quote plenty of experiences, of individual experiences of hosts who are becoming hosts on Airbnb to afford this cost of living. And previously, these people did not have the opportunity to benefit from the cost of from tourism. But now, thanks to Airbnb, they can become hosts quite easily, welcome guests, and benefiting from this additional income. This, of course, has also a positive impact when it comes to the local economy, because when you travel, you spend locally, you go to local restaurants, you buy some food, you visit some sites, etc., etc. This has a good economic impact on the local region, which again were not able to benefit from tourism before because they could not fix the income of tourism. The reason being because there was no hotel, right? So if I take an example of France, for instance, in France, you have 34,000 cities and villages. And among them, only 6,000 have a hotel or traditional accommodation, right? But Airbnb is today present in 29 cities. So you see that with Airbnb, we are giving the possibility to thousands of additional cities to benefit from the income created by tourism. And I'm not mentioning also the positive impact that it has on taxation, because this tourists pay tourist tax, and this, of course, is additional money for public accounts that is then reinvested in tourism. So that's really a virtuous circle and a win-win game for the region. And so when we observe this trend of people wanting to be, more flexible, looking for longer stay, looking for authentic stay in rural areas, we've developed some tech tools to accompany this trend and to reinforce this, right? And so these two specific tools we've developed on the platform are, first, what we call the I'm flexible features, and second, the categories. And so here I will stop sharing this screen, and I will share the Airbnb website to show you what I'm talking about. So just give me a minute, bear with me. Sorry, I can't. Why can't I share my screen? I can't share my screen, unfortunately. Give me a minute. I'm sorry, I'm having an issue with my computer. Close down.
If it's a real issue, then maybe.
I'm sorry, just give me a minute. I'm working in a tech company, but still having some tech issues.
If you think you can resolve it very quickly, then by all means, but otherwise maybe we can just continue and
Yeah, sorry. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you for your patience. So here I was talking about the I'm flexible feature. So this is the Airbnb website. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's the window which appears when you open the website, right? And here, if I need inspiration, I can use this feature. I'm flexible, right? And so let's say we are looking for a place to stay next week. And that's how this will be displayed. So here, I may not be looking, for Pornichet or for Bossieux, but the website will offer me some opportunities and offer me some ideas for me to pick and choose, which may be totally different from the initial idea I had, right? And today, people are more and more using this I'm flexible feature to be inspired, and actually they end up in non-urban areas. You will see the list of destination here. There are no big cities, right? It's more rural, it's more countryside, it's mountainous area, etc., etc. So that's the first feature we've put in place. And the second feature is this bar here. It's categories, right? Again, the idea for us is to bring people to the unknown, to something they had not thought about, right? And if I check, for instance, a category which I like very much, which is the heritage category, right? I'm able to, I'm being offered a lot of opportunity to discover castle and to stay, as you will see, in rural areas. And this, using technology, we are able to redirect the touristic flows in some places which were not top of mind for people. You know, look at this place, Normandel in France is a tiny village. Augerus is also a tiny village. And this is how we support what we call the dispersion of tourism. So if I go back to my slides, there we go. And so this category, I was just showing you the heritage category, because heritage is something we are very proud at Airbnb. It's a category we started to launch last year because we wanted to put the light on this small rural heritage that is across EMEA, not only in France, but also in Spain, in Italy, in the UK, etc., and which gives an opportunity for people to discover small villages and also to contribute to the renovation and to the maintenance of heritage. Because when you stay in an heritage site, on heritage accommodation, the money that the host is getting from your stay is very often reinvested, you know, in the maintenance and in the refurbishment of the place. So we believe that it was a very good virtuous circle, again, a win-win situation to create. And so when we realized that, and we wanted to accompany this trend for people to discover more authentic and rural stays, we went a step further. And I want to give you a focus here, to share with you a focus on our work on heritage, because I think it's bringing a lot of added value to your to places and region in your respective countries. So what we started to do is that last year we became partner of the French National Heritage Foundation to support this renovation work across the country. We gave a donation of several million euros, and we will support the refurbishment of 400 sites in the country. But then we didn't stop in France, right? Then we went to Italy, and we did the same, because the government and the region were very eager for for tourism to support also this local heritage. You may remember the project that was led by the Italian government about €1 houses, right? How you encourage people to come back to villages and to stay long term, to experience these authentic stays, to renovate the home, etc., etc. And then we didn't stop in Italy. We went to Spain because we saw there was an appetite for heritage and rural stays. And so we closed this agreement with Casas Históricas. But then we believe, we saw that there was an opportunity to go beyond in England. And so that's why we closed this agreement with the English heritage. We did also with Germany. We are working today with the European Association of Historic Homes, with Belgium, and soon with Portugal. And so doing so, we believe that we are putting a specific light on these rural areas and rural heritage sites for the benefits of the local region, but also for the benefit of our guests, of our community. So this is something which is very supporting this trend for more rural stays and rural tourism. And so, as you said, Dorothée, in introduction, we also wanted to accompany destination and governments that wanted to attract this new kind of worker, what we call digital nomads or remote worker. And so we published an Airbnb guide to live and work anywhere, dedicated to this destination, wanted to attract this new worker. And no surprise, what is making the difference with destination is if they are implementing some visa facilities for remote workers. So it's the case, for instance, for Croatia, for Romania, Italy is also thinking about that. The second key topic is about tax. Is there, is the tax framework simple for remote worker, for longer stays, etc., etc. And most importantly, and maybe I should have started with that, is the availability of the Wi-Fi and internet. This is also, this is we are here today on Zoom. This is what makes the remote working possible, right? And so we published this guide and launched a call to action for destination to partner with us, for us to help them to put the light on their unknown or less known destination. And when we launched this call for application, we got many incoming requests, and the choice was difficult to make it to the final list of 20. But it was a good exercise to sense the appetite of this destination to be put on the map for remote worker. And a key example I wanted to highlight today is the work we've done in France, where we shaped a special program to attract remote worker in rural villages. This is not a first shot, right? We have been working with the French Association of Rural Mayors since 2018, because in 2018, the association came to us and saying, okay, we have a problem. We only see tourists passing by. They are not staying in our villages. They may enjoy, a day trip, but they are not, this kind of tourism does not benefit locally. How can you help us to put more light on this destination, which are eager to attract some new kind of tourism and which are eager to be put on the map, right? And so we did several programs to promote tourism in these very small villages. Again, some villages which have not traditional accommodation, so which are struggling to attract and fix tourism. And so this time, we did a specific program identifying key villages with co-working facilities, with specific events, with specific guide tips, etc., to attract remote worker. And we also shaped an influencer campaign and promote it on the social network to attract more remote worker in these villages. So that's just an example of the kind of campaign we've done. This is also true in other destinations, such as in Austria, where we've worked with this very beautiful and rural part of Austria in the southeast of Salzburg with the same approach. How can we put this destination on the map so that it becomes top of mind for people looking to stay and work at the same time in a beautiful scenery? So, long story short, you will have understood that we are the witness, we observe a long-lasting trend in the tourism industry. The limit between work and life is getting blurry. People are staying longer in more rural destinations. And this has obviously a positive impact on local economies of this less known destination, which are most of the time very rural. And so that's what I wanted to share with you, and I'm happy to take any question, and I look forward to have this conversation with you.
Thank you very much, Juliette, and thank you very much for our presentation. I think that, as Dorothea said at the beginning, it's always important when we're dealing with development to actually look at what individuals and firms are doing. We normally live in this sort of academic and policy bubble and forget that development really comes from people that want to actually implement and develop new ideas, and firms that want to invest. So you have outlined a very interesting set of changes that have come mainly as a result of the pandemic that Airbnb is experiencing. But I would like to, and I think there are comments also coming from the audience in that respect, to try to get some sort of figures or some sort of how pervasive this sort of trend is. So my first question to you would be, you mentioned some figures. You mentioned that there had been a 55% increase, that there had been 1.3 million hosts for Airbnb across the whole of Europe. But the question is it something that you're seeing that in relative terms, this is becoming more important relative to the traditional, let's say, tourism towards big cities? And are those stays now likely to become not just longer, but also far more permanent for periods of longer than a month? You mentioned, I think, that it was about 20% of all reserves were closer to a month now, and they were not before. But this is just likely to be like, for example, I suppose it was in your case of Mare, that you went there for a school holidays and then came back? Or do you see that this is a more permanent type of development?
I think it's always difficult to have a crystal ball, so it's difficult to talk about the future. But what we observe is that things have totally changed after the pandemic, right? And if I look at the way, for instance, employees at Airbnb behave, I don't see them coming back to the status quo, right? So I think the answer is not only for me. I mean, it will depend on first the policies that the companies will put in place. Some very early after the pandemic have said, yeah, you can work and work from anywhere, and then they came back to say, okay, but it's good if you come back to the office 2 or 3 days a week. So it will very much depend on companies' policy, and second, it will very much depend on how and this is the key word for us today, how destinations are promoting their attractiveness, right? But it's difficult for me to say that stay will beyond 3 months or 4 months will become the norm. I think it will very much depend on the company's policy as well.
In order to give some numbers, is the process as pervasive across the whole region that you're dealing with? Is it more common, so for example, the booking of rural holidays in certain countries than in others, in your area of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East?
No, that's a trend we observe across the board. It's true that after the pandemic, there was a disaffection, I would say, for a large urban markets, because people wanted to have some space, they wanted to gather with their family, and so obviously they were looking for larger house, which is not what is available in city centers. But what we also observe over the past, I would say, past quarters, is a new interest in cities, right? And this is also driven not only by domestic tourism, but because foreigners and cross-border tourism is starting back, right? And yesterday there was some figures disclosed about Paris. The tourism figures in Paris are all-time high, right? Even higher than before the pandemic. So it's a mixed bag as always, but I believe that this taste and appetite for rural is going to stay.
So, but you just mentioned the case of Paris. Is it that tourism is rising everywhere and then a rising tide lifts all boats? Or is it that the rural tourism, the tourism towards small cities and towns is eating somewhat into the tourists towards big cities and the traditional holiday destinations?
No, I think it's not a zero-sum game. I mean, I think people are eager to travel more. Transportation is made easier. And this is something that benefit both the rural part and the urban part.
So thank you very much. One of the things we saw after the pandemic was that not all areas were attractive. And for example, in the case of France, there was a massive increase in sales across the country overall. But once you started doing the analysis from a geographical perspective, most of those sales took part in the west of France, outside the big cities, as you mentioned. People fled the cities, but they went to the west of France, to places like Brittany, to places like Nouvelle-Aquitaine, to places like Poitou-Charentes. They went far, far less to many areas of eastern France, which, I mean, to me came as a surprise. Who is winning in this trend towards, let's say, more rural tourism? Is it the already attractive places that existed, or before that, where you already had significant reservations? Or are you seeing that this tourism is expanding to areas that before did not feature and did not attract a lot of tourism?
I think Brittany will, I mean, already started with an advantage, right? It's a well-known place. There is some supply available there. And as you know, tourism is an industry based on supply. So when you create supply somewhere, you attract some guests. So there was already an existing accommodation supply. But I remember that, some remote part of Alsace, for instance, of Grand Est, saw a spike in demand because of the availability of large accommodation. And this is really top of mind when people are looking for travel today. They are, at least on Airbnb, they are first looking for a specific home, which is equipped for their needs, but or is something. A place that they have been dreaming of, right? The case of heritage. So. Second point, I think it very much depends also on the local policy of the region, right? I mean, is the tourism organization willing to attract these new travelers, and doing some proactive work to do it, or not? What we've seen after the pandemic is that every region, for instance, in France, launched a marketing campaign to attract new guests. But some were more successful than the other, I would say, and that's here where we can help them to figure on the map, right? So, for instance, you were mentioning Nouvelle-Aquitaine, and I remember that when we worked with Nouvelle-Aquitaine in the past, because their concern was that everybody was going to Bordeaux region, and to Gironde, and nobody was visiting Haute-Vienne or Corrèze, which are very remote areas. And here we said, okay, so the objective is to direct this flux, this tourism flux, towards this less remote area. And doing this proactive work, we were able, and we saw it in the numbers, to direct more stays in these places which were not on the map, I would say, before. So I think it very much depends also on the proactivity and the objective of the local tourism organization.
Right. There are questions coming in many ways to complement this one. So one question from the audience is highlighting, you mentioned that there has been this increase of 55%, but what is the share of, let's say, your business in your area of Airbnb that is in rural areas, in medium-sized cities, in small cities and towns relative to the big cities? How big is that?
So the last figure we published around that is that today 51% of our nights are in high urban density area. So it's half at the moment, right? Which was not the case before, right? When I joined Airbnb, when we looked at the situation in France, Paris was like we are more than, the huge majority of the business, right? And today it's only maybe 10 or 15% of the listing. So we've seen this dispersion across along the year. And again, I think this is here to stay, because what we see is that more and more people are becoming hosts, because again, they need this additional income. I mean, they see it as an opportunity to gain additional money. And this is something we've observed over the past year in the context of high inflation. We had like almost more than 1 million additional hosts, right? So it's a lot, and it again, you know how tourism works, right? When you create a place, an accommodation somewhere, you attract tourism. So you attract guests, and this has positive impact on the local economy. So in terms of trends, that's what I can say today.
Let's turn to the factors that determine the attractiveness of particular places. What are the key factors that in the analysis of Airbnb makes a place attractive to these, let's say, longer term stays, to remote nomad workers that want to spend part of their time somewhere outside the office or the places where they normally live?
I think the key answer, I mean, the key word to your question is Wi-Fi. It's Wi-Fi. You know, if you have a good internet access, a good Wi-Fi, a good broadband, that's the first thing people are looking for on the platform. You know how the platform works. You are able to choose some key equipment you want to have in your accommodation, and Wi-Fi is the first one to be checked. I mean, that's the most searched for equipment on Airbnb. And looking at, I mean, observing this trend, we've also improved the product, right? So, for instance, we've developed features on the website which allow hosts to measure the quality of their Wi-Fi, right? So that guests, when they enter the home, they don't have bad surprise about the Wi-Fi, because I mean, you've experienced that as I did. The first question you have is, can you give me the Wi-Fi code, right? And so we saw that by including this feature in the website, directly in the app, it would provide better information to the guests. But to answer your question, that's really the first key thing of attractivity and defining the attractivity of an accommodation today.
But I'm looking at the map of high-speed broadband in Europe at the moment in front of me. And you have many countries where access to high-speed broadband, and it would be surprising, for example, Austria is relatively low, but by contrast, what you have is Hungary and Romania, and most parts of rural Spain, for example, but also many parts of rural France that have very decent accesses of to high-speed broadband. I suppose that in the case of Romania or the case of Hungary, just having a good Wi-Fi access is not sufficient. What would be other factors that would make it attractive? Why do people choose certain locations and not others?
I'm less familiar with Romania and Hungary, but I believe that what makes the difference is also the proactive promotion this destination can make, right? I remember, I mean, we see today, if you take the metro in Paris, you will see some advertising campaign for Spain or for Italy, right? I haven't seen any campaign for Hungary or Romania yet, right? So it really depends on the strategy of the local organization to attract workers or not. You've mentioned Hungary and Romania, and I think they have put in place some visa facilities for remote worker, but I don't remember having seen, any promotion about it toward at least toward a French audience. So yeah, again, it's very much depends on the strategy of the country, right?
And since you're talking about strategies, that this means that Airbnb has to engage with actors. You mentioned in your talk the owners, the hosts, but you also mentioned now governments and the role they play. Who are the key stakeholders? Who are the key actors you engage with? And how would you rate their importance in making a place, a non-metropolitan area, attractive to remote workers?
So I would say the key stakeholders we are engaging are the local tourism organization, so they may be local or national, but that's really our key partners in this work. We also work, of course, with governments. For instance, we are working with Italy at the moment on their nomad nomad worker visa, sorry. And we are working with other governments to, for instance, to promote destinations which are less, again, top of mind. That's the case in Greece at the moment. But on a day-to-day, our first interlocutor and stakeholder are local tourism organization. And they often come to us saying, here our strategy, for instance, is to attract, let's say, families, right? What can we do together to attract more families? And so the first thing we do is that we analyze the data we have for their destination and identify, some kind of the different corridors, the seasonality, the type of the if there are families or not, and then we shape together a campaign, which is most of the time digital, or campaign to our guests directly, so we can do direct outreach through email, promoting their destination or using some mechanics or tactics to attract families. So, for instance, it could be a partnership with a local tourism organization to kind of contests to offer a stay for a family in the city of in the countryside of France, for instance, in France, what we've done last year. We also done that for the region in Orléans, which is not a highly urban area. So we do really campaign, I would say, sur mesure to accommodate the needs of the destination. It can be, I need to disperse more tourism. It can be, I need to attract more solo traveler or more families. It can be, I need to attract Americans. So, we have plenty of mechanics and expertise, I would say, to accompany this objective from the local tourism authorities.
And in this tailor-made approach, do you have an example or a series of examples that you would say, this is the way it should be done? This is the way a partnership between, on the one hand, a private company like Airbnb and some local authorities, be they, let's say, municipal authorities in rural areas, in small towns or in medium-sized cities, how they should be handled and why? Do you have any sort of examples that you can illustrate here?
I think we know have quite a good track record of partnership, and I can tell you that the one who are working the best, with more impactful, are the one where we agreed on the common objective, right? And again, when tourism organization comes to us with a clear plan and clear will to work with Airbnb, I mean, this is really powerful, and we can have very, very strong results. But there needs to be an appetite for both sides to work together. I'm thinking about an example of a campaign we've run last year with the Région Île-de-France, so the Paris region. So the idea here, when we discussed with the region, was not so much to put light on Paris, but more on the suburban side of Paris. So the ask was quite clear, right? We needed to put light on some villages which were not, for instance, Versailles, or Marne-la-Vallée with Disneyland. The idea was to direct guests to more remote place. And the second ask from the region was to put some light on local heritage, right? And so we discussed together, we identified the data, and we came up with an idea to offer a unique stays, so one-night stays in home of French writers. And so, for instance, it was Alexandre Dumas, who had his place near to Paris in Marly, or it was a famous painter, Rosa Bonheur in Val-de-Marne, etc., etc. And with this campaign, we managed to put some light on some very small villages out of the beaten tracks. Marly-le-Roi, nobody goes there, but now people are starting to go there. And so I think the key success factor is, again, alignment on the goals and real collaboration. So it takes time to make a big project. It takes time to make a campaign happening, but the results are very impactful.
You have mentioned the word appetite several times here. And of course, when there's appetite, everything works, but there might be reasons why there's no appetite. We've seen conversation about holiday homes, mainly in cities, much less in rural areas. But what are the key factors that determine that some places jump to the occasion, whereas others lack what you call that appetite? What are the main obstacles that you're facing to establish this sort of fruitful relationship that you've been describing before?
I think that the key, I think the key factor is that we, again, with this tailor-made approach, we provide attention to destinations which are not under the spotlight, right? So it's easy to, I mean, it's important to say, to this destination, we hear you, right? We care about what you are trying to do, and we are going to help, right? But I'm not going to, I mean, obviously I'm not naive, right? The reason why some destinations do not work to work with Airbnb, it's because of, you know, of political aspects, or maybe some question of local politics, which I'm not going to elaborate on. But again, what's work is when there's an alignment of goal and objective, right? And if a region comes to us, we will always find solution and help them to reach their objective.
Right, there are a lot of questions coming from the audience, so this is going to be the last one from me before we switch to the audience. Of course, Airbnb is a private company and it looks for profit, but also local governments and local actors look for benefits. Who wins the most from this relationship? Is it Airbnb? Is it the local actors? Is it mutually beneficial? And what are the main advantages and drawbacks in that respect?
I think, again, I think it's a win-win situation, right? I mean, this benefit first to hosts. I mean, for me, that's my key stakeholders, right? Hosts across the world. We have like today more than 6 million accommodations. So it's a lot of people who are benefiting from tourism and from this additional income. It's also obviously the cities, which are benefiting not only from the tax incomes that I mentioned earlier with the tourist tax, but also with benefiting from economic activities. And most of the time, what is important is that, what is interesting is that different, I mean, the part of the cities which are benefiting from tourism are different from what they used to be, right? It's not only the city centers, it's more the outskirts, it's more some places which are outside of the touristic hotspots. So for me, it's really a win-win game. But again, the first people to benefit from the development of Airbnb, I would say, are our hosts.
But just finally, and are these hosts always local? Because I imagine that a lot of these homes are holiday homes by people who already live in big cities that are not local, and therefore many of the benefits might revert back to the big cities rather than stay locally.
Yeah, but you know, if you look at the EU, I mean, we have more than 1.3 million hosts, and 1 million share only one listing, right? One home, right? So I think the biggest majority of our hosts are really doing it on an occasional basis, trying to make some additional income to face this cost of living. And this is what matters to me, right? So that's why it's important also, and this is a topic we have not tackled upon, but that's what it's important that, you know, when government shape regulation, they manage to pay specific attention to primary homes, to people renting their room, for instance, in their place, and to ensure these rules are proportionate to them, so that there is no obstacle for hosts to benefit from this tourism, from this new kind of tourism.
Well, thank you very much, Juliette. There are, I think your talk has created a lot of stir. There are a lot of questions. I see already 22 questions coming in the question and answer section, a lot of others coming from the chat. I'm going to have to apologize to everyone because we're not going to have time to cover all the questions and very interesting questions that have been raised. But let me start with some that I might think might be particularly important. For example, there's a question coming about who is moving. And the question more concretely is the increase in trend in rural small towns, does this increase include families with children? Because parents can work anywhere, anytime if they have the right type of job. But of course, it might not be the same when you have children because they depend on school holidays, etc. So is the trend just mainly for adults without children or young professionals, or is it also for families?
No, you're right. Obviously, it's obviously more difficult to live and work anywhere where you are family and and kids need to go to school. So what we see today is that we see an increase in solo traveler. So typically, that's the professional, married or not, or in couple or not. Being obviously more flexible and able to take the decision to, okay, I'm going to work from Greece for 1 month and I'm going to work from Italy for 2 months and travel then to Brazil, etc., etc. So obviously, yes, it's less a phenomenon that we observe for family because we know what kind of constraints parenthood and kids at school bring, of course.
Another question that is coming is about the potential social implications of having a lot of new population moving into what were traditionally less dynamic centers. So is Airbnb taken into account the potential social implications and issues that could arise from a large influx of digital nomads or remote workers to a particular destination?
But it's funny because if you ask local policymakers, and especially in rural areas, they are happy to see people, right? They are welcoming new population. They are happy to see people going to the bakery. They are happy to see some activity and some life, right? This is exactly the reason why we've worked with the National Association of Rural Mayors, because they didn't want anymore to see houses closed, and open only 3 weeks a year. So I think this is the other way around. They are happy to see new people and new faces. But then when it comes to ensuring that there is, I would say, no nuisance, we've also developed some important tools. We've developed some, neighbors hotline where you can reach out to Airbnb if there is some noise or nuisances, etc., etc. And it works quite well today with this tool. So I wouldn't like, the small number of cases to put some shades on the situation, which is very positive, especially for these rural areas, which are happy again to see some villages living again.
Yeah, sorry to focus a bit more on perhaps the negative externalities, although you have mentioned that there are a lot of positive and very important externalities. But there's another question coming which says, which policies, if any, to engage remote workers in taking care somehow of their destinations is Airbnb engaging with? Are there policies to support, let's say, common responsibility rather than just the use of local assets?
What do you mean? Policies done by Airbnb or policies done
in conjunction, either that Airbnb is encouraging or it is doing in conjunction with local authorities to make sure that there's some responsibility by these remote workers on the places in which they are engaging with, they're working with?
I think two parts to answer your question. The first one, people using Airbnb are responsible people, right? And you know that if you are a host or a guest on Airbnb, we have a system of notation and reviews, which is reciprocal between the host and the guest, and the behavior is included in these reviews, right? So when you are a guest and you stay in an Airbnb, you are reviewed by your host, and the host reviews the guest, and so you don't really have any interest to misbehave or have bad conduct, because this will be recorded, I would say, in your profile, and so that's the first thing. Second, what we do to prevent any misbehavior is that we work with cities and with local government to issue, for instance, some good guest guide, what we call the good guest guide. We've done that. For instance, in Strasbourg. We've done that in Cannes, in the south of France. We've done that with the Department of Eure-et-Loire, etc. And this good guest guide gives some very concrete and pragmatic tips to guests to ensure they live like a local. And when I say like a local, is also that they stick to the local habits. So for instance, in Strasbourg, I remember the key issue was about how you recycle the trash, right? And so when you are a tourist, you arrive in a new city, you may not be aware of the local guidelines, etc. And so we've worked with the city to shape this kind of guides and distribute them to the guests to ensure they are aware and then can comply or follow these guidelines. In the south of France, the topic is another one, is people going to the beach and coming back to the house with feet, plenty of sand, etc., etc. So we did another information campaign about the good behavior in these local cities and villages. So that's the kind of action, but again, that we do. But again, we need to the local destination need to come to us to say, hey, here we have identified an issue. Can you help us to address it and better inform or educate your guest community? And again, when the ask is clear, we are very happy to join this effort.
And on a related note, and I'm sorry to insist on this, but there's a question by Andrea Membretti highlighting which are the social and economic disparities that this process can imply, and are, let's say, the nomad workers, the remote workers, not becoming a privileged category in and of themselves with different rights and different conditions to the local population in the areas where they just go for on a temporary basis of a few months of the year?
Yeah, but sorry, I'm not sure I'm the best person to respond to this question. Maybe it would be a question to address to local government or to municipalities.
Well, no, thank you very much. Let's go to there are some other questions more on the planning system, and this one by Max Rousseau, who says, in France, new legislation aims to limit the artificialization of land. It's called, I suppose, in French, zéro artificialisation nette, which is likely to have an impact on the construction of new housing and may lead to competition for the use of existing housing. There are already tensions in certain places like New Aquitaine and Brittany. Is Airbnb concerned by these issues, and how is it positioning itself relative to the possibility that new housing might be constructed? And this is something that is probably not just French, it might reverberate with quite a lot of planning systems across Europe and other parts of the world.
Again, I guess this is a question for public authorities to say, because they are the one deciding on whether or not you can build new housing or not. So what I can say, on the contrary, that the concern of most of the destination in France today is how to ensure that we can fight against what we call the volets clos or les lits froids, phenomenon, the fact that the assets, the housing assets, are underused. And this is especially true when you look at a country like France, where there is a huge proportion of secondary homes, which are only, open like 3 weeks per year for family reason, and the rest of the year they are empty. They are and they are not bringing any life or added value to the local economy. So I guess here Airbnb is more an opportunity to revive this house and to give them a purpose, I would say, outside of the traditional holiday times. And that's why when we talk about legislation, I mean, legislation is quite clear. In secondary home can be rented, especially in rural areas, because there is a positive effect. And this is also true because it's ski season. So that's why I want to quote this example. But what mountainous areas and ski resorts are doing, right? The problem today in ski resorts is that there is a lot of accommodation, but they are not used all year long, right? And that's what we call the lit froid. And all what we are working on with ski resorts, for instance, in France, is how we ensure that these assets are better used throughout the year. So it goes through renovation, because most of the time this accommodation, have been built back in the 60s, 70s, and are not yet, not anymore very, I would say, fashionable or very equipped. So it goes through renovation and also energy efficiency improvements, and it goes through to making hosting more easy and more easy to host, right? So that's something we've been working on with cities like La Clusaz or Chamonix, or the French Association of Mayor of Mountainous Area, because they are very, very concerned about this lit froid situation.
And on the whole issue of, let's say, not just the use of housing, but also of infrastructure, there's a question by Joel Anderson, who first thanks you for your highly interesting presentation and is a keen user of Airbnb. And he's asking if Airbnb is considering any challenges on the horizon following the developments that you describe. He says, for example, in terms of infrastructure needed to accommodate larger flows of tourists and perhaps traffic to rural areas where such infrastructure might not be adapted. For example, the needs for new roads, the need for parking spots, etc., and the like.
Again, I'm not sure that I'm the best place to answer this question, because when it comes to deciding new infrastructure, it's more about the state or local authorities. But one thing I'm thinking of is that if you bring additional travelers in this region, you are also bringing additional tax income, right? Because you pay tourist tax. And I know some example in Europe where this tourist tax is redirected to building some new infrastructure, including transportation. So again, I think here it's a very virtuous circle and win-win situation. If we can get, you bring more tourism, it creates more economic positive impact, and also some additional money that you can reinvest in building the infrastructure. But after it's very much up to the choice of the local policymakers. It's not for me, private sector to decide, I would say, on the building of infrastructure or not.
But if I may intervene here, so the private sector can lobby, especially in a period in which we're going towards a green transition, and we're trying to get net zero emissions. And there's the question coming from Giovanni Padula on the issue of by promoting the mobility of people to, let's say, remote and rural locations that very often are not easy to access, that might for example, have implications for the environment, not just the local environment, but the overall environment. So if there's no trains, there are, let's say, sustainable means of transport. What is going to be used is either, on the one hand, the car, or on the other hand, planes and airports that might contribute to global warming and not go align or be aligned with the objectives of zero emissions. I know you may want to say, well, this is mainly for decision makers to make a decision, but what is the position of Airbnb in this respect? And is it likely to take a stance in the future regarding, so the idea of trying to make these trips far more sustainable?
So to think here, I think first, and this is not, I mean, this is something we observe, is that there is an increased trend into proximity tourism, right? So of course, when you, if you live in Paris and you go spend your holidays in the Marne, it's going to be less impactful to the environment than if you take a plane to Barcelona, for instance. So there is this trend we observe. After again, I mean, it's. I'm sorry to get the ball back in the court of the public authorities, but it's also a question about the price, right? When you see that the train tickets for a family are like 2 or 3 times more expensive than a travel by car, you need also to factor that in, right? But if you are saying that, I mean, tourism is having an impact on the environment, that's a different conversation to say. What the thing on which we can have an impact is our host and the accommodation which are present on Airbnb, right? And this is how we can. That's what is in our control at the moment, right? I'm not going to have an impact on the price of the train tickets or the frequency of the plane, etc. What I can have an impact on is helping the host on the platform to increase, for instance, the energy efficiency of the accommodation, so that we can make this stay more, sustainable, friendly on the long term. And this is something we are already working on, for instance, in the UK or again in France, where we are supporting financially some hosts to increase, who have started renovation work, whether it's to change the window or to increase the isolation of their place, etc. This is where we can have an impact, and that's where what we want to focus on in the coming months and years.
Thank you very much. Let's move to another block of questions, which are more with lifestyles and changing lifestyles. And there's one coming from an anonymous participant is saying, do people seeking for longer stay in rural areas expect something different than traditional short-term tourists? Do they also expect good public services and facilities around, including museums, but also healthcare services, for example? Do they behave in a radical way, in a differently radical way than that of traditional tourists that might go for a 1-week holiday and never come back?
I think that when you stay long time in a place, of course, you create more connection. You may be more attentive, I would say, to your environment. That's for sure. So, but I don't have, that's my opinion, and that's not something that I can back with figures or with study. We have not surveyed with this question.
Okay, and there's another question which goes in a slightly different direction, but do you see a trend in terms of the people that start using Airbnb then decide to go for a far more rural life? Is this looking for, let's say, longer term rentals a first step towards settling more permanently in rural areas and starting to work remotely on a permanent basis?
Yeah, that's a good point. Again, I mean, that's, and sorry to quote a French example only, but that's something that's exactly the program we've worked on with La Clusaz which are a ski resort in the French Alps, and they were looking for, again, to revive a little bit the village and to attract people permanently. And to do this, we work with them to give the possibility to a family to live for 1 year in La Clusaz, with the objective of having them to relocate long term. So that's something that can happen, absolutely. I think that, you know, when you've enjoyed some good time and good life in a superb rural region, there's and that your company allows you to do it and your family situation allows you to do it, there is no reason why you would not be encouraged to relocate. And we call this program, I think it was taste it before you buy it, you know, to encourage people again to test the new environment before they choose to relocate permanently.
Okay. On this relationship, which might work, and there are a lot of things that work, but some others might not work. And this is what Kurt Usowski is highlighting, that he's highlighting that in the United States, the short-term rental of homes to tourists through platforms like Airbnb might be affecting low-income renters, essentially supporting those services to tourism by withdrawing houses from the more regular long-term type of rental market. And this might be particularly acute, and not just in the United States. I can think of France or other parts of the world, in areas that are highly popular. So, for example, national parks or winter resorts, or areas that are on the beach or very close to nice beaches. Does Airbnb have any comment on such matters?
Yeah, of course, but again, I mean, it depends on the regulation which is put in place. You know, you were mentioning Brittany earlier, or you know, touristic areas. I mean, today these cities have access to a regulatory toolbox that helps them to prevent this kind of phenomenon, and we are really much accompanying them to do it. You know, sharing data so that they can identify the potential issue and control them. So this is pretty much depending on the regulation which is put in place. Now, I don't want us to miss the point that for a lot of people today, Airbnb is what helps them to stay in their home, right? And to afford their home, and also to pay the rent. So there's really a two-sided thing here, and we shall not forget the positive aspect that Airbnb is bringing. Airbnb and other platforms, right? Because, you know, Airbnb has become kind of a word, right? That's a buzzword, but we are not the only player in this area.
Okay, there are quite a lot of questions coming on these matters of our conflict, but I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to focus on just one final question on another area. So Airbnb has the advantage of being well established in large metropolitan areas, but also beyond the metropolitan areas in rural areas and small cities and towns. What does the experience of Airbnb in metropolitan areas can teach? What can it teach to its development in more rural, smaller city areas, and vice versa? What are the lessons learned, and how can they be applied to both types of areas?
It's a difficult question. I mean, can you just elaborate a little bit again so that I can make sure I understand the question?
Yes, that Airbnb is well established in big cities, and in big cities it has generated a lot of positive dynamism, but it also has been at the heart of some conflict, and it has probably attracted or extracted some lessons from that experience. Vice versa, it's now becoming far more important. You said that it's now 50-50 outside those big cities, and it's learning from its experience in these rural areas. How can these experiences be mutually reinforcing, and then how can we learn from that sort of activity?
I think that the key experience we learn, I mean, it's not so much about the opposition between urban and rural. I think it's more about the experience that the time has given us. And I think one of the key lesson is when it comes to to policy making and to regulation, is to agree on the phenomenon we observe, right? And this is with data transparency and information sharing that we can reach this point. What we've learned with this very strong growth in urban areas at the start of Airbnb is that we could have done a better job in explaining what home sharing was, who were hosts, why they were doing that, why they were hosting, etc. And maybe we could have done a better job at this. And so that's why today, when we see that there is a new Airbnb are progressing and developing in rural areas, we are a little bit more proactive when it comes to with conversation with policymakers to say, okay, this is what Airbnb is about. This is the kind of benefit it brings to your economy. This is the kind of regulatory tools you have at your disposal if you want to know more, to control this development. And so I think, to your point, what we've learned along the year is to be much more proactive in engaging conversation with policymakers to make them understand what is Airbnb and how they can, benefit from.
Well, thank you very much, Juliette, for a very engaging presentation, and even more engaging and more dynamic discussion, and for not shunning any of the, I would say, quite challenging and interesting questions coming from the audience. But over to you, Peter, to wrap up the dialogue.
Thanks, Andres. Good afternoon, everyone, and many thanks for taking the time to join us today. And I'm sure I can speak on behalf of all the participants when I say many thanks to both Juliette and Andres for their time, and what was both a very interesting and thought-provoking discussion on what non-metropolitan areas can do to enhance their attractiveness to visitors and nomad workers. As Dorothy mentioned in her opening remarks, this third dialogue on the future of regions aimed to build upon the groundwork laid in the preceding dialogues and to put that theory into practice by providing an industry perspective. And I think Juliette and Andres delivered this in spades today, highlighting evolving visitor and teleworking trends, including the factors that enhance the attractiveness of non-metropolitan regions to both of these groups, including obviously very good internet access, and when we're talking about in other countries, visa arrangements that are easy to navigate, and also tax frameworks that are also quite simple and easy to navigate. And the need also for the private sector to have a positive working relationship with stakeholders, not only at the local level, but also at the regional and national level, to be able to deliver real benefits and also to reduce any potentially negative impacts. And I think Juliette touched upon this right towards the end when she was suggesting the need for this very proactive dialogue with policymakers. Today's discussion will inform our ongoing work on rethinking regional attractiveness in the new global environment, which we are undertaking with the support of DG Regio. We are currently finalising the 15 regional flyout case studies, and we'll publish a synthesis report before the summer. Barring any technical problems this afternoon, Juliette's presentation, along with the recording of the discussion with Andres as well, will be available on our Regions in Globalization webpage in the coming days. And I believe the link for this was already placed in the chat function. Finally, I just wanted to highlight that we will be hosting the fourth webinar in the Rethinking Regional Attractiveness series on 15th of March, and it will focus on the role of special economic zones to enhance the attractiveness of non-metropolitan areas. And it will have a particular focus on the agricultural sector. So a save the date and an agenda will follow shortly, and I hope you're all able to join us on the day. Unless anyone else has Andres or Juliette have anything else to say, Juliette, you wanted to make
Yes.
a remark? Okay.
No, I just wanted to thank you all for having me today. And I know that we didn't have time to address all the questions you had. So if you want to reach out to me, I will be happy to follow up.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, well, on that note, thank you once again to all the participants who listened in, and to our 2 speakers. And I wish you a very pleasant evening. Thank you very much.